Hey, I'm Mirenda. I'd intended this morning to make a fun video saying, oh, these are all the things that entertained me on Facebook and brought me joy, but I can't do that today. I've woken to the news that two men have been murdered within 5 days of one another in California. The murders took place 50 miles apart. Both were ruled a suicide despite the families contesting this assessment. And what am I supposed to do with that information? It's mind-boggling. And then it occurs to me that many of you don't know the history of lynching in the United States. You don't have a contextual background for this. So today, as my own form of protest, this is me marching with my own sign, except it's a video and I'm talking directly to you. I'm going to talk to you about the first lynching I remember in my lifetime, and I'm going to talk to you about the history of lynching in the United States. I am hoping that in sharing this information, people will be able to speak about these lynchings and any other lynchings that are discovered from a place of knowledge, that you'll have context, and it won't devolve into these arguments on social media that just remind me not to argue, not to argue, not to argue. And sometimes I'll seem to be speaking in a frivolous and jovial manner, but that's just what I do to protect my mental health. Like, it's hard talking about these topics all the time. It's hard living with them, so give me some grace. The first lynching I remember is of James Byrd Jr. It happened in 1998 in Texas.
It was a chilling, gruesome crime that shocked the nation. Nearly 21 years ago, June 7th, 1998, three white men in Jasper, Texas, beat an African-American man, this man, James Byrd Jr., and then chained him to the back of a pickup truck, stripped him from the bottom down, and dragged him several miles to his death. His dismembered body abandoned on a dirt road.
Three self-proclaimed white supremacists, Lawrence Russell Brewer, Sean Allen Berry, and John William King, heinously murdered an innocent black man for sport. They named it sport. Now, what that video doesn't tell you is this. At 2 a.m., James was just walking home responsibly from a party. And then the three guys in the pickup truck and James all recognized each other and they offered him a lift home. But instead of giving him a lift home, they beat him severely. Then they chained him to the back of a truck and they dragged him behind that truck 1.5 miles down a dirt road, during which time he was lifting his head up and moving it from side to side to prevent himself from being knocked out. He was turning his body side to side to prevent the pain from, one side getting torn and the other side getting torn. The flesh was ripped off his body and he broke several limbs, and it was horrible. But then they took him onto the tarmac. His right arm was torn off. The flesh of his face was worn down to the bone. He was dismembered. And afterwards, they threw his mutilated, broken body on the steps of a black church to further terrorize more black people. I remember watching this on the news and being absolutely terrified, thinking that my life must have no value at all if people can just drag us behind pickup trucks. The ringleader was unrepentant. He said, yes, he did it, but he didn't believe he had committed a crime. Because you see, to him, murdering a black man for sport, it's not a crime. Just not a crime. This is all terrifying to me. I didn't realize the state of stress I lived in till I moved to Ireland, and that stress started to relieve a little bit. And I had a more objective view of how I was raised and the climate that I was raised in. It is terrifying, but that's what lynching is for, to terrorize people. So what is lynching and what's its history in the United States? Most of us think that it's black bodies hanging from trees, but it's so much more than that. I'm going to quote an LA Times article about James Allen. He collected photo evidence that documented lynchings in the United States, and he learned so much. While collecting photo documentation of lynchings, James Allen gathered facts. He learned everything he could about lynching, beginning with the definition. A lynching is when three or more, outside of the legal system, kill somebody accused of a crime or offense. Hanging is often, but not always, the method of a lynch mob. Victims are often burned alive, mutilated, dismembered.
Well, the mobs were cowardly. The men were shackled and kidnapped out of prisons by hundreds and even dozens and at times and thousands of people. 15,000 people knew and came to the lynching, the killing, brutalizing, torturing. They cut off his fingers one by one of a 17-year-old boy in Waco, Texas. It was just a mass spectacle, and they prolonged it. They castrated him. They threw him on a fire. And for anyone who has any reservations about whether the government had a handle in this or not, the mayor was in his office window, and so was the photographer, who had a front row seat, and left us pictures that looked out of the window, but look back in at us now to answer for these crimes.
Where was law enforcement during this period?
Well, he was there too. The sheriff was in the window with the mayor. Thanks for bringing that up. The poor boy was taken out of a courtroom. Both the judges and the sheriffs in there were armed, had pistols. There's no effort to... no black life for most sheriffs was worth risking his own life for.
Let's put this in perspective. In the 1830s, before the Civil War, lynchings were a form of vigilante justice, and they were really popular because of the lack of faith in the judicial system. And at that time, most of the victims of lynching were white men. After the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period, there was a shift, and the victims became primarily black men, even though women and non-whites were also lynched, but at a way smaller percentage. Now, there's this myth that lynchings only happen in the South, but that's not true. Although they were concentrated in the South, with Georgia being the worst, they were all over the United States, including in the Midwest, where a lot of black folks migrated after slavery ended. Ida Wells Barnett was an American investigative journalist and one of the founders of the NAACP. Now, she said lynching reinforced white supremacy in the United States through racial terrorism. Basically, lynching was used to terrorize black people and maintain the social order. Arthur F. Rapper, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, he's a sociologist. He analyzed 100 lynchings during the 1930s, and he discovered that at least 1/3 of the victims were clearly falsely accused. There are approximately 4,000 recorded casings of the lynching of black people between 1865 and 1950. However, scholars estimate there could be another 2,000 such cases. We're just unable to verify them. Today, in 2020, anti-lynching laws are non-existent or inconsistent all across the United States. Each state does its own thing. Some say, no, we're against lynching, and other states say, we're okay with it. Since the 1930s, advocates and politicians and everybody have tried to make lynching a federal crime. On the day of George Floyd's memorial, there was a vote to make lynching a federal crime. And somebody stood in the way of that. His name is Rand Paul. He didn't like the definition. He wants lynching to be more narrowly defined, so you have to be dismembered before it's a lynching. You have to be hung from a tree before it's a lynching. You can't just be kidnapped and beaten and terrorized. It has to be more for him to think it's a lynching. Look, in my hurt and in my frustration, my message is astoundingly and it's bitterly clear. Please be an ally, please. We need you. If all this race stuff is making you uncomfortable, if you're sick of hearing about it, be an ally. Help eradicate all of the systematic racism, the murders, the everything. Just help get rid of it. And then it won't be a topic anymore. We need you. And if you can't be an active ally, if you can't protest, if you can't donate or any of the other things, I have a very, very simple thing for you to do. Please stop making excuses for police brutality. Please stop saying, oh, well, let's look at their history and see if their death was really that bad. Please stop trying to contextualize our deaths by saying they're not about race, when it is clear through academia and even the white supremacists are saying it's about race. The guys that killed Mr. Byrd, they belong to a larger hate group. That hate group still exists today. They still want to kill black people today. They're not shy about it. They're open about their intentions. Can you say no to them, please? Please be an ally, particularly if all it's going to cost you is some discomfort and maybe a few racist friends, because your advocacy could save a life. You could stand in the gap for a life just by changing a few hearts and minds by standing with us. Thanks again for listening to all my thoughts and feelings today. You know that this is healing. It's therapeutic for me, and I'm hoping that putting this information in the world will change some hearts and some minds, or bolster some hearts and minds. I don't know. I just know that we need you, and I need this. Thank you for listening. I'll chat to you later. Bye.